The morning sun peeked through the clouds, casting a soft golden glow over the sleepy town. Birds chirped gently as the breeze danced through the trees lining Maple Bridge. It was the kind of morning people wished for, calm, clear, and filled with quiet promise. For young Ella, barely a year old, it was just another exciting day of discovery. Her parents, Julia and Mark, had made morning walks a ritual. Ever since Ella was born, they believed in fresh air, early sunshine, and teaching their daughter to explore the world with her eyes wide open. As always, Ella was buckled into her favorite blue stroller, her tiny hands gripping a plush giraffe, while her feet kicked with excitement at every fluttering leaf and passing jogger. Maple Bridge, an old pedestrian crossing that stretched above a shallow creek, was one of their regular routes. Locals loved its view of the town below, its weathered charm, and the way the light filtered through the nearby oak trees. That morning, it looked peaceful, completely ordinary. But sometimes, the extraordinary hides in plain sight. As they approached the center of the bridge, Mark slowed down. He was pointing out something to Julia about the old bolts in the railing, explaining how the bridge hadn't been repainted in years. Ella, meanwhile, was unusually quiet. She leaned forward in her seat, her wide eyes scanning the edge of the bridge. Then, without warning, she let out a sound. It wasn't a cry, but a loud, insistent followed by a small finger pointing to something near the rusted bench up ahead. At first, Julia thought she was pointing at a squirrel, or maybe a bicycle passing below. But as she followed Ella's gaze, her steps came to a halt. Just beyond the bench, half hidden in shadow, was a large figure. Julia squinted. It looked like a dogno, definitely a dog curled tightly against the side of the bridge, unmoving, except for the slow rise and fall of its chest. The fur was dark, patchy, and covered in dust. Something about the way it was lying still, but not asleep, sent a wave of concern through her chest. "Mark," Julia said, her voice low, "do you see that?" Mark followed her line of sight, his expression shifting instantly from casual to alert. He parked the stroller and walked forward slowly, hands out in front of him, careful not to startle the animal. Ella leaned over the side of her stroller, her eyes locked on the dog. She wasn't scared, just curious, like she knew this was something important. As Mark drew closer, he saw it more clearly. It was a German Shepherd, large but clearly underfed. Its legs were tucked beneath it awkwardly, and its head rested flat against the wood. One paw was caught in its own leash, twisted around the bottom of the bench. The dog lifted its head slightly and looked at Mark, but didn't growl or bark. It simply stared. Mark crouched down a few feet away. "Hey there, buddy," he said gently. The dog's ears flicked. It blinked slowly. Still, no sound. Just that gaze, quiet, sad, but somehow calm. Julia approached too, keeping Ella back, but speaking softly. "Poor thing. How long has he been here?" Ella babbled again, louder this time, and the dog shifted toward the sound. It didn't flinch. In fact, its eyes softened. For a brief second, something passed between the baby and the dog, something neither parent could explain. It was Ella who noticed him. It was Ella who insisted they stop. And it would be Ella's small act of curiosity that would change all their lives forever. As the breeze picked up again, ruffling the German Shepherd's fur, no one could have predicted what the next few moments would set in motion. The stillness between them was heavy. The soft wind passed under the bridge, whistling faintly, but everything else, time, noise, even thoughts, seemed to pause in that moment. Mark stayed crouched near the dog, careful not to move too fast. Julia stood a few feet back, gently rocking Ella's stroller. Her heart raced, not out of fear, but from the overwhelming feeling that they were witnessing something they weren't meant to miss. The dog slowly raised his head. His eyes met Mark's first, cautious, tired, but not aggressive. Then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, he turned toward Ella. The baby's hand was outstretched, her chubby fingers curling and uncurling, like she was trying to wave. The dog stared at her, unmoving, and then he blinked. Just once, then twice. "Mark, look at his eyes," Julia whispered. He did, and what he saw made his chest tighten. They weren't the eyes of a wild or dangerous animal. They were filled with something else, something unspoken. Pain, exhaustion, but also trust. The dog didn't growl or show his teeth. He didn't even try to stand. He just laid there, as if too tired to run, too hurt to fight, but still hoping that someone might care enough to help. Mark slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a granola bar. He unwrapped it halfway and extended it. The dog sniffed the air but didn't move. He looked at the bar, then back at Mark, then at Ella again. Only after a full minute did he inch forward slow, dragging his tangled paw with a small whimper. That sound broke Julia's heart. Mark held his breath as the dog came close enough to take the granola bar gently from his hand. He ate it in small bites, chewing carefully, like he hadn't eaten in days. His movements were weak, but calm. "Good boy," Mark murmured. "That's it. You're okay now." Ella let out a delighted squeal, clapping her hands together. The dog's ears twitched. He turned to her and, to their surprise, stepped a little closer to the stroller. His body still trembled slightly, but his tail wagged once, just a faint motion, as if it took everything he had left to do it. Then he did something that stopped Julia cold. He rested his head gently against the edge of Ella's stroller, like that Dot, as if he knew her, as if somehow she was the reason he'd held on long enough to be found. Mark slowly reached for the leash tangled around the bench. It had wrapped around a post in several loops, tight and knotted. As he worked to free it, he noticed the fraying edges of the leash, like it had been worn down from struggling. How long had he been here? A day, 2 more. There was a metal tag on the collar, brushed silver, with one word engraved in block letters: Rex. "His name's Rex," Mark said softly. Julia stepped closer, her voice trembling. "He must have been waiting for someone." Ella babbled again, this time with more excitement, bouncing in her seat. Rex turned to her with those same soulful eyes. There was no question now the dog was responding to her more than anyone else. A few people walked past on the far end of the bridge but didn't stop. Just a family with a baby and a dog, they probably thought. Nothing out of the ordinary. But Julia knew better. This wasn't ordinary. This was fate. "We can't leave him here," she said. Mark nodded. "No, we're not going anywhere without him." He gently unfastened the final knot, freeing the leash. Rex winced as he moved his paw, but didn't resist. He stayed right beside Ella's stroller, tail twitching every so often, like he was trying to show gratitude, the only way he knew how. As they turned to walk back across the bridge with Ella, cooing, Julia holding the leash, and Rex limping quietly beside them, there was one thing they all seemed to feel. Without saying a word, something had begun, and nothing was ever going to be the same. The walk home felt longer than usual. Julia held the leash loosely in one hand, careful not to pull or pressure the dog, and Rex trotted beside the stroller with slow, stiff steps. Every now and then, he would glance at Ella as if checking to make sure she was still there. She was, and every time he looked, she would smile, kick her legs, and babble happily. It was strange, really, how natural it all seemed. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't wild or restless. He was just tired. Bone-deep tired. Mark stayed close, occasionally reaching down to steady Rex when he stumbled slightly. The dog's paw, the one that had been twisted in the leash, was red and sore. He walked with a limp now, though he never once whined. He just kept going, like he had made up his mind not to stop again. By the time they reached their neighborhood, a few curious neighbors peeked out. One woman walking a poodle across the street slowed her pace and stared. "Is that a stray?" she called out. "We found him," Julia replied, not stopping. "We're calling animal services." The woman nodded and kept walking, her poodle barking uselessly in the distance. Julia and Mark exchanged a glance. They knew what some people might say: a large, unfamiliar dog around a baby. But neither of them felt unsafe. In fact, they felt something closer to protected. Back at their front porch, Mark ran inside to grab his phone and a bowl of water. Julia sat on the step with Ella in her lap, watching Rex carefully. He didn't try to run. He didn't even look. At the open street behind them, he lay down slowly, curling near Ella's feet, his head resting on the welcome mat. The collar around his neck was faded and scratched. Julia gently turned it to read more. It had only the name Rex and a symbol that looked like a small mountain etched next to it. No phone number, no address, nothing else. The leash, however, told a different story. Frayed at both ends, the rope had clearly been through a lot. One part looked like it had been chewed through, the edges uneven and stiff. The part that had tangled around the bridge was worn smooth, almost polished from friction. It didn't look like someone had tied Rex there, as much as it seemed he'd gotten stuck, possibly while trying to escape something. Mark came back with a bowl of cold water and placed it in front of Rex. The dog looked up at him briefly, then began to drink slowly, almost politely, as if still unsure whether he was truly welcome. "I called the shelter," Mark said quietly. "They're sending someone out. They'll check him for a microchip." Julia nodded, watching Rex's ribs move beneath his thin coat. He's starving. Ella reached out with both hands toward Rex, letting out a loud giggle. He looked up mid-drink, ears twitching, and let out a soft, breathy noise that almost sounded like a sigh. He didn't move any closer but didn't pull away either. He trusts her, Julia said. It's the strangest thing. Mark sat down beside them. It's not strange, he said. It's something else. I don't know. Like he knows she's safe, like he knows she saved him. They sat there together for the next 20 minutes. No one said much. Rex dozed, Ella babbled, and the wind whispered through the nearby trees. When the white van from Animal Services pulled up in front of the house, Rex opened his eyes, but didn't flinch. The officer stepped out, clipboard in hand, and approached slowly. He looked at Rex, then at Ella, then at Julia and Mark. You found him where? Julia pointed toward the bridge. Tangled in a leash. Just lying there, he wouldn't leave her side. The officer knelt beside Rex, scanning him gently for a chip. After a short pause, the device beeped. He's chipped, the officer said. We'll see what we can find out. Rex looked back at Ella one last time before the van door opened. And for just a moment, everyone wondered if they were doing the right things, sending him away. The van door closed with a soft click. But to Ella, it sounded like thunder. She didn't cry right away. She just stared at the space where Rex had been, her small hands gripping the edge of the stroller. The quiet was heavier now, not the peaceful kind they'd walked through earlier, but the kind that settles over a room after something important is gone. The officer had been kind, gentle with Rex, patient with questions. He reassured them that the shelter would scan his chip, contact the registered owner, and make sure he received food, water, and proper medical care. But his eyes, when he looked at the dog's thin frame and injured paw, hinted at something unspoken, something Julia and Mark both noticed. There's no guarantee, the officer had admitted. If the owner can't be reached, or doesn't want him back, we'll have to see what's next. He didn't say what next might mean. Now the van was gone, and so was Rex. The street felt empty. Even the wind seemed to pause. Julia picked up Ella and held her close. The baby leaned into her mother's chest, unusually quiet. Her gaze was still fixed on the road. No squeals, no claps, just silence. That afternoon, the house felt different. Still warm, still familiar, but missing something it had never had before. Rex's quiet presence, his eyes, his calmness. That strange feeling that something bigger was happening. It had vanished the moment the van drove away. Mark sat on the couch, his phone in hand. He had the shelter's number saved already. I'm going to call, he said, just to check. Make sure they took him in okay. Julia nodded. Ask them if he's eating, and if he's scared. Mark gave a small smile. You mean ask if he misses us? Julia didn't answer, but her silence said yes. He dialed. The young woman answered, her tone brisk, but not unfriendly. When Mark mentioned Rex and the location, where they'd found him, her voice softened. Yes, we know who you're talking about, she said. Big German Shepherd. No aggression. Very quiet. He let us bathe him without a fight. Mark exhaled. That's him. Is he okay? There was a pause. He's stable, thin, underfed, but we're treating the paw injury and giving him small meals to build his strength back up. Did the chip give you a contact? Another pause. Yes, but it's complicated. The number led to a man who's currently in long-term care. A neighbor brought Rex in 3 weeks ago after a car accident. They said the dog got out when the gate was left open. No one came to claim him. So he's unclaimed. Legally, yes, she said carefully. We'll keep him here for the standard holding period. After that, if no family steps forward, or no one claims ownership, we'll list him for adoption. And until then, he waits. Mark thanked her and hung up. Julia watched him from the kitchen. So she asked, already dreading the answer. He's okay, but no one's coming for him. Julia bit her lip. We can't just leave it like that, I know. That night, as they put Ella to bed, she clutched her stuffed giraffe tighter than usual. Her eyes scanned the doorway like she was waiting for Rex to appear again, like it hadn't sunk in that he was gone. When Julia kissed her forehead, Ella didn't smile. After she fell asleep, Julia and Mark sat on the couch in the dim light of the living room. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, Mark broke the silence. I didn't think it would hit this hard. He was with us for less than an hour, but it felt like he belonged here. Julia whispered, like we were supposed to find him. Mark nodded. I think Ella knew before any of us. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees again. Somewhere across town, Rex lay in a metal kennel under fluorescent lights, far from the baby, who had reached out to him on the bridge. And though no one said it aloud, one truth hung heavy in the air. This wasn't goodbye. Not yet. The next morning, Ella awoke before the sun. Julia stirred at the sound of soft babbling from the baby monitor. Normally, Ella would wake slowly, rubbing her eyes, humming to herself, kicking the side of the crib while waiting for her parents. But this morning was different. She wasn't playing. She was calling. Then came a sound Julia had never heard from her daughter before. A whimper. Not quite a cry, but close. When Julia picked her up, Ella's face scrunched as if something was missing. She twisted her body toward the hallway, pointing insistently toward the front door. Mark joined them in the living room moments later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. She did it again, he asked. Julia nodded. She's looking for him. She thinks he's still here. Ella crawled to the door, sat in front of it, and stared. Her tiny hand reached for the doorknob. Then she turned back and looked at them, as if to say, well, let's go get him. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. She doesn't understand what happened. Maybe she understands better than we do, Julia said quietly. By noon, Ella still hadn't lost interest. She ignored her favorite toys, barely touched her food, and kept crawling back to the door. When Mark knelt beside her with a teddy bear, she gently pushed it aside and pointed to a stroller, not with frustration, but with purpose. She wanted to go back. Julia and Mark sat together again, watching their daughter with quiet awe. Neither could explain it, but both felt it. Ella wasn't going to let this go, and neither could they. By 2 p.m., Mark was on the phone with the shelter again. Hi. Yes, it's us again. The couple who brought in the German Shepherd from Maple Bridge. The one named Rex. The woman on the other end smiled through her voice. I remember. The baby's family. Mark chuckled. That's probably the best way to put it. Rex is doing okay. He's still quiet, but he ate all his food this morning. We had to move him to a quieter kennel because he kept looking toward the door. Mark paused, like he was waiting. Exactly. Like he was expecting someone. When Mark hung up, Julia was already getting Ella dressed. You called, didn't you? She asked with a smile. He nodded. They said we could visit. Just as a check-in. But they both knew it wasn't just that. Ella seemed to know, too. She clapped and kicked with joy as she was buckled into her stroller. Her little feet wiggled with every turn in the car, her eyes wide with anticipation. She didn't know the word shelter, but she seemed to know exactly where they were going. The front desk receptionist greeted them kindly. You're here for Rex. Julia nodded. We just wanted to see him. A volunteer led them down a hallway filled with the quiet hum of air vents and soft barks from behind glass doors. When they reached the third kennel on the left, the volunteer smiled. He's been very calm, but this morning, he stood up every time he heard footsteps. As they approached, Rex sat up. He didn't bark, he didn't whine. He simply stood, walked toward the glass, and stared straight at Ella. Julia bent down and lifted her daughter closer to the glass. Ella reached out her hand and let out a single word neither of them had taught her. Rex. Mark's mouth dropped. Did she just? She did. Rex let out a soft, low sound from his chest. His tail gave one slow wag. Then another. The connection was still there. The shelter worker looked between them and nodded slowly. I'll get the paperwork started. If you're serious about fostering or adopting, we can begin today. Julia looked at Mark. He didn't need to answer. He just smiled and whispered, let's bring him home. The car ride home felt different this time. Rex sat quietly in the back seat beside Mark. His large frame curled carefully to avoid touching Ella's car seat. He didn't move much, but his eyes never left the baby. Ella, meanwhile, giggled uncontrollably, tossing her soft giraffe toy toward him again and again. And every time, Rex would lean forward, nudge it gently back with his nose, and then settle. Once more, Julia glanced at them through the rearview mirror, her chest tightening with a strange mix of joy and disbelief. She had no idea how this had happened, how a chance encounter on a quiet bridge had led to this unlikely family. But deep down, it felt like it had always been meant to be. At home, they let Rex explore the house at his own pace. He moved slowly, pausing at every doorway, sniffing every corner, as if committing it all to memory. His limp had improved slightly after the vet's bandage, but he still favored his injured paw. Still, there was no hesitation in his steps, only curiosity and caution. When he reached the living room, he looked around once, then padded over to the rug near Ella's playmat and laid down with a deep sigh. as if saying, "Finally, I'm home." Ella crawled toward him instantly. Julia held her breath, ready to intervene, but Rex simply lifted his head and watched her. As she reached out, he nudged her hand gently with his nose. She squealed and pressed her forehead to his side, hugging him the only way a baby knew how. "Looks like he's chosen his spot," Mark said with a soft laugh. That evening, they fed him carefully. The vet had given instructions, small portions at regular intervals, to avoid upsetting his stomach. He ate with calm dignity, glancing at them between bites, like he was grateful, but still adjusting to this strange turn of luck. Julia set up a soft blanket and a shallow water bowl beside Ella's toy bin. "It's not much of a bed," she said, "but it's a start." Rex didn't complain. After dinner, he lay back down beside Ella, watching her stack colorful blocks with wild enthusiasm. Every few minutes, she would pause, turn to him, and babble something, as if telling a very important story. He listened silently, ears twitching, eyes half closed in contentment. Later that night, after Ella had fallen asleep in her crib, Mark found Julia on the couch, watching Rex doze by the sliding glass door. "He's settling in fast," Mark said. Julia nodded. "It's like he was waiting for this." Mark sat beside her. "I keep thinking about that bridge. About how we almost didn't stop." "Me too," she whispered. If Ella hadn't seen him, they both fell silent, remembering the moment, how easily they could have missed him, how quickly he could have slipped away unnoticed. But somehow, he had stayed. Somehow, Ella had seen what they hadn't. She knew, Julia said. Somehow, she just knew. Rex stirred in his sleep and let out a low, contented breath. The house was quiet, warm, complete in a way that neither of them could explain. The next morning, Julia opened the curtains to a golden sunrise spilling across the floor. Rex was already awake, sitting calmly near the door. When Ella stirred in her crib, he stood and waited. And when Julia brought her out, the moment her tiny feet touched the floor, she toddled toward him with a squeal. Rye. The day began like that. A dog who had lost everything, and a baby, who somehow gave it all back. In just a few days, Rex had become more than a rescue. He had become family. A week passed, and Rex was no longer just a guest, he was home. Neighbors who had once glanced at him with caution now smiled as he walked past with Julia or Mark. His coat, once dull and matted, was beginning to shine again. His limp had eased, and he moved with a slow but confident stride. He wasn't playful like a puppy, but there was a dignity in the way he walked beside Ella's stroller, occasionally glancing sideways to check on her. But even as the days settled into a gentle rhythm, something about Rex remained mysterious. At night, when the house was quiet and Ella had long since drifted to sleep, Rex would sometimes sit by the back door, ears alert, eyes trained on the dark yard, as if listening for something. Not anxious, just watchful. Mark noticed it first. "He does that every night," he said one evening, as he sat beside Julia on the couch. "It's like he's waiting for someone." Julia nodded. "I've seen it too." "Do you think he remembers?" "Before. I think he remembers everything." That thought lingered. They knew the shelter had found a name linked to the microchip, but with no family willing or able to claim him, there had been no more information. Still, Julia couldn't let it go. She felt like she owed it to him to understand where he came from, and why he had ended up tangled in a leash on a cold bridge. So one afternoon, while Ella napped and Rex snoozed at her feet, Julia made a quiet call to the shelter. "I was wondering if it's okay to ask about the man tied to Rex's chip," she said gently. The woman on the other end hesitated, then responded in a careful tone. "We can't give out personal information, but I can tell you what's public. His name was Walter Klein. Lived just outside the city. Elderly. No close relatives listed." "Was?" Julia asked softly. There was a pause. "He passed away 3 weeks ago. Just days before Rex was found." Julia's heart sank. "So Rex didn't just get lost?" "No," the woman said gently. "From what the neighbor told us, Mr. Klein had Rex since he was a puppy. They were very close. After the accident, the gate was left open. The neighbor assumed Rex had run off, but it looks like maybe he was trying to go back to the bridge. Back to somewhere he and Walter had walked together." Julia hung up the phone and sat quietly for a while. Then she looked at Rex, lying peacefully with his head beside Ella's tiny socked feet. He hadn't been abandoned. He had been mourning that night. She told Mark everything. No wonder he was so calm. Mark said, he wasn't lost. He was grieving. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the stars outside. It all made sense now. The watchful eyes, the stillness, The way he never barked. Rex hadn't been looking for a new home. He had been searching for peace, and somehow Ella had given it to him. In the days that followed, Julia noticed subtle changes in him. He wagged his tail more now. He followed Ella closely, especially when she toddled near the steps. He began to sleep more deeply, his body finally allowing rest. The shadows behind his eyes began to lift. One afternoon, as Ella played in the garden, she fell forward on the grass. It wasn't a hard fall, but her surprised cry echoed across the yard. Rex was there before Julia could even stand. He nudged Ella with his nose, circled her, and lay down beside her as if shielding her from the world. Ella clung to his fur and laughed again. The fall forgotten. Julia stood in the doorway, her heart full. Rex hadn't just found a home, he had found purpose again. The weeks turned to months, and the seasons quietly shifted. Spring melted into early summer, and life inside the home continued with a kind of beautiful simplicity. Rex had settled in completely. He no longer watched the back door at night. He no longer flinched at distant sounds, or walked with the heaviness of loss. Instead, he stretched out across sunlit rugs, waited patiently at Ella's crib each morning, and walked calmly beside Mark or Julia through the park trails. He even had his own bowl with his name on it, hand-painted by Julia, in shaky blue letters, while Ella smeared finger paint on everything else. To the outside world, it was just a happy story. A dog adopted by a young family. A baby who loved her. Four-legged friend. But to those who lived inside that story, it had become something else. Something deeper. Something almost sacred. One warm afternoon, they returned to the bridge, not because they had to, not to recreate the moment, just because it felt like the right place to go. Mark parked the car on the shoulder, while Julia unbuckled Ella from her seat. The little girl had grown since that day, more confident on her feet now, her hair a bit thicker, her words forming clearer every week. She squealed as soon as she saw the bridge, and reached for Rex's leash. He stood calmly as she held it, even though she was barely tall enough to reach his shoulder. Family walked together to the same spot where it had all begun, the same place where a baby had pointed, where a mother had hesitated, and where a father had taken one small step toward something bigger. Rex stood still and looked out over the water. A gentle breeze brushed through his fur. There was no leash, tangled this time, no fear in his eyes. Only calm. I wonder if he remembers, Julia said softly. I think he does, Mark replied, but not the pain, just the turning point. They stood there in silence, just listening. Birds chirped softly overhead. The water moved below in slow ripples. It was peaceful now, like the moment had come full circle. Ella tugged gently on the leash, pulling Rex toward the other side of the bridge. He followed without hesitation. Julia smiled. She always leads the way, doesn't she? Mark nodded. She was the first one who saw him. Maybe she saw what we were missing. As they walked back toward the car, an older couple passed them and stopped to smile. Beautiful dog, the woman said kindly. He looks like he's been with you forever. Julia returned the smile. Feels like he has. Rex turned his head slightly, as if he knew they were talking about him. His ears perked for a moment, then relaxed again. That night, as twilight filled the house with soft golden light, Julia tucked Ella into her crib. Rex lay curled at the foot of the rocking chair, where he always stayed until Ella drifted to sleep. Julia stroked Ella's hair and whispered, "You saved him, you know? Somehow, you knew he needed us." Ella blinked slowly, a little smile forming at the edges of her lips. Then she turned her head, her tiny voice slurring into sleep. "Right home." Julia swallowed hard, kissed her daughter's forehead, and sat down beside Rex. She placed a gentle hand on his fur, just as Ella always did. "You're home now," she whispered. And that was the truth. He wasn't just rescued. He wasn't just adopted, who was chosen by a baby, of all people, at just the right moment. And in return, he had given them something they hadn't realized they were missing. Protection, loyalty, peace, and love, in its purest form. Somewhere on a quiet bridge, a broken leash had once clung to the rail, forgotten. But in this home, in this small moment of forever, something far stronger had taken its place. Family.